She had given him roots when he had none, watered his dreams with her own sacrifice, and he thanked her by pulling up everything she planted, including herself. It was a Friday morning in early October when Margaret sat at her kitchen table, watching the sunrise paint her garden in shades of amber and gold. The tomatoes were heavy on the vine, the late-season roses still blooming defiantly against the coming frost. She heard the car pull into the driveway and smiled, thinking Marcus was early for once. But when her grandson appeared in the doorway, he wasn't alone. A sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit stood beside him, her designer handbag worth more than Margaret's monthly Social Security check. "Nana, this is Jessica, from the bank." Margaret's hand froze halfway to the coffee pot. "The bank?" Jessica stepped forward, extending a manicured hand. "Mrs. Coleman, it's wonderful to finally meet you. We need to talk about the house." The coffee mug slipped from Margaret's other hand, shattering against the kitchen floor in a burst of ceramic and dark liquid. Jessica opened her briefcase with crisp efficiency. "As of yesterday afternoon, the ownership of this property has been legally transferred. You have 30 days to make arrangements for alternative housing." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. "I don't understand. This is my house. I've lived here for 43 years. Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. "Nana, you signed the papers. Remember? Last month? I told you it was just insurance stuff." And then it came flooding back. The stack of documents Marcus had brought on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. His explanations about protecting her assets, about making sure the family property stayed in the family, how he'd highlighted the signature lines and told her not to worry about the legal jargon. She had trusted him, her own grandson, the boy she'd raised after his parents died when he was 8 years old. "You tricked me." Jessica's smile grew sharper. "Mrs. Coleman, I understand this is emotional, but everything was done legally. Your grandson is now the rightful owner, and he's chosen to sell to a development company. They're planning to tear down the house and build condominiums." "Tear it down? But the garden, all my plants." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It's just business, Nana. The neighborhood's changing. This is a smart thing to do." Margaret looked at her grandson, really looked at him and saw a stranger. Gone was the 8-year-old boy who used to help her plant marigolds, who would spend hours listening to her stories. In his place stood a man she didn't recognize, talking about her life's work as if it were just business. "Where am I supposed to go?" Jessica consulted her tablet. "There are several senior living facilities in the area. It'll be good for you, Nana." Marcus said, "You'll have people to take care of you. You won't have to worry about maintaining this big old house anymore. I never asked you to worry about me, but I do worry. You're 81 years old. What if something happens? What if you just wanted the money?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus's face flushed red, but he didn't deny it. Before the betrayal, Margaret had been more than just an elderly woman in a house. She had been a mother, twice over. She and Harold had married young, full of dreams about filling their home with children. But after years of heartache, they'd learned to find joy in other things. Harold's carpentry business, Margaret's garden, the quiet contentment of love that didn't need words. They were in their 50s when the phone call came. Harold's sister and her husband had been killed by a drunk driver. Their 8-year-old son, Marcus, had survived with nothing more than a broken arm and bruises that would fade. The emotional wounds would take much longer to heal. "We'll come get him right away," Margaret had told the social worker. Marcus arrived on a Thursday in March, clutching a garbage bag of clothes and a stuffed elephant he was almost too old for but couldn't bear to leave behind. He was small for his age, all knees and elbows and eyes that had seen too much. For the first month, he barely spoke. He ate what was put in front of him, went to bed when told, did his homework with mechanical precision. It was as if he was afraid that any show of personality might result in another loss. Margaret understood. She'd learned about survival during her own childhood, growing up during the Depression, so she didn't push. She simply made space for him. She converted Harold's woodworking room into a bedroom, painting the walls blue because she'd noticed Marcus always chose the blue crayon first. She enrolled him in school and learned to make grilled cheese sandwiches cut diagonally because that's how his mother had done it. But it was the garden that finally broke through. One Saturday morning in April, Margaret was outside planting her annual tomatoes when she noticed Marcus watching from the kitchen window. She waved him over. "Want to help?" He shrugged, which she took as a yes. She showed him how to dig the holes just deep enough, how to gently coax the tender plants from their containers without damaging the roots. His small hands were surprisingly gentle. "My mom had a garden," he said suddenly, the first unprompted words he'd spoken since arriving. "She said gardens were like hugs for the earth." Margaret smiled. "Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. Marcus was quiet for a moment, carefully patting soil around a tomato plant. "Do you think she would mind that I'm here instead of with her?" The question broke Margaret's heart. She set down her trowel and turned to face him fully. "Baby boy, your mama loved you more than anything in this world. She'd want you to be with people who could love you the way she did. She'd want you to be somewhere you could grow. Like the plants. Exactly like the plants." From that day forward, the garden became their shared sanctuary. Marcus would rush home from school to check on his tomatoes, and Margaret would find him there on weekend mornings, carefully watering the marigolds with the dedication of a master gardener. Harold, gruff by nature, softened around the boy in ways that surprised everyone. He taught Marcus to use tools properly, to take pride in work well done. On summer evenings, the three of them would sit on the back porch, sharing slices of watermelon and watching fireflies dance among the flowers. "This is the best home I've ever had," Marcus said one night when he was 10, sticky with watermelon juice and drowsy with contentment. Margaret had to excuse herself to the kitchen, where she stood at the sink and wept with gratitude. Marcus thrived under their care. His grades improved, he made friends, he learned to laugh again. By middle school, he was talking about becoming a landscape architect so he could make beautiful places for people to live. When Harold died of a heart attack at 73, 16-year-old Marcus was the one who held Margaret together. He spoke at the funeral with composure that amazed everyone, talking about how Harold had taught him that love wasn't just a feeling. It was an action, demonstrated daily through small kindnesses. "What are we going to do now, Nana?" he asked afterward, as they sat alone in the garden. She took his hand, noting how much larger it had grown. "We're going to keep growing." And they did. Margaret learned to handle the finances Harold had always managed. Marcus learned to mow the lawn and fix leaky faucets and drive her to appointments. They were a team, bound not by blood but by choice, by years of shared meals and inside jokes, and the kind of love that grows slowly but runs deep. When Marcus graduated valedictorian, Margaret sat in the front row and cried with pride. When he got a scholarship to study business, she helped him pack and promised to send care packages. "I'll be back every weekend," he promised. "You better be. Or who's going to help me with the fall planting?" But college changed him. The weekend visits became monthly, then sporadic. When he did come home, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone, talking about networking and opportunities. He stopped asking about the garden. His business degree led to a job at a financial planning firm. He moved into an expensive apartment, bought expensive clothes, started dating women who smiled politely but looked at Margaret's modest home as if it were a museum exhibit. The transformation wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like watching a plant slowly lose its color. By the time Margaret realized something fundamental had changed, it was too late. She kept hoping. She kept making his favorite meals, kept updating him on the neighbors and the garden. She kept believing that somewhere underneath the expensive suits was the boy who had once called her garden home. She should have seen the betrayal coming. The signs were there. His sudden interest in her finances, his questions about property values, his suggestions that she might be happier somewhere with less maintenance. But love was often blind to the very things it should see most clearly. After Jessica and Marcus left, Margaret walked through her house as if seeing it for the first time. Every room held memories. The living room where she'd taught Marcus to read, the kitchen where they'd bake cookies every Christmas morning. But it was the garden that broke her heart. She stood at the back door, looking out at a half-acre of carefully tended plants that had been her life's passion. The apple tree she'd planted the year Marcus came to live with her. The rose bushes that had been wedding gifts. The vegetable garden that had fed them through lean times and abundant ones alike. All of it scheduled for destruction in 31 days. That night, Margaret sat in Harold's old recliner and cried. Not the quiet, dignified tears of grief, but the raw, ugly sobs of betrayal and loss. But as the tears dried, something else stirred within her. Something that felt like steel wrapped in silk. Margaret Coleman had survived the Great Depression, World War II rationing, the loss of her husband, and raising a grieving child. She had built this garden with her bare hands and weathered every storm that had tried to destroy it. She wasn't about to let her own grandson be the one thing that finally broke her. The next morning, she drove to the offices of Premier Properties, the development company buying her home. Mr. Davidson was younger than Marcus, with aggressive confidence that Margaret associated with people who had never been told no. His office was all glass and chrome, with architectural renderings showing sleek condominiums that looked nothing like the neighborhood she called home for 4 decades. Mrs. Coleman, what a pleasure. I understand you're the current resident of the Elm Street property. I am, and I understand you're planning to tear down my house. Davidson launched into a practice presentation about luxury living and modern amenities. Margaret listened politely, her hands folded in her lap. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Davidson, how old are you? He blinked. 32, but I'm not sure what that has to do with. Have you ever grown anything? Plants, I mean. Davidson looked at her as if she'd started speaking in tongues. No, not really. Margaret nodded. I thought so. Mr. Davidson, the property you're planning to develop isn't just land. It's a living system. There are plants there that have been growing for decades. Trees that provide habitat for birds and shade for the neighborhood. A garden that has fed families and beautified the community for over 40 years. I understand your emotional attachment, but from a business perspective, everything comes down to business with your generation, doesn't it? Margaret stood up. Tell me, when you build your condominiums, what are you going to call them? We haven't finalized a name yet. Might I suggest a wasteland? It seems appropriate. She was halfway to the door when Davidson called after her. Mrs. Coleman, the sale is final. The permits are approved. Even if you want to contest this, you'd be fighting a losing battle. Margaret paused with her hand on the door handle. Mr. Davidson, you're absolutely right. I would be fighting a losing battle, which is why I'm not going to fight at all. I don't understand. Margaret smiled, and for the first time since Jessica had walked into her kitchen, it was genuine. You will. That afternoon, Margaret drove to the greenhouse behind Millfield Community College, where she'd volunteered for nearly 2 decades. Dr. Patricia Williams was tending orchids when Margaret knocked. Margaret, I was wondering when we'd see you again. Pat, I need to ask you about something. Something I probably should have mentioned years ago. They settled onto stools beside a workbench. Margaret took a deep breath. Do you remember what I told you about my background? My education? Patricia frowned. You said you'd been gardening all your life. Self-taught mostly. That wasn't entirely true. I have a master's degree in botany from Auburn University, class of 1963. I worked for the USDA for 12 years before I married Harold. Patricia stared at her. Margaret, why on earth didn't you tell us? Because I didn't want to work anymore. I wanted to live. I wanted to garden for the joy of it, not because someone was paying me to do it. Margaret told her about Marcus, about the house, about the 30 days. When she finished, Patricia was quiet for a long time. Margaret, do you know anything about the State Historical Preservation Society? There's a program for protecting historically significant gardens. If we could document the botanical importance of your property, we might be able to get it designated as a protected site. Margaret felt something flutter in her chest. Hope, maybe. Would that stop the development? It would certainly complicate it. At minimum, it would require environmental impact studies, public hearings, appeals processes. Even if they eventually got approval, it could take years. Years during which you'd remain in your home. Patricia continued. If you're willing to reveal your credentials, if you're willing to let us bring in experts to assess your garden properly, we might be able to save it. What would I need to do? Document everything. Every plant, every tree, their ages, their origins. Then we write a comprehensive report demonstrating the historical and botanical significance. Then we filed the application. How long would all that take? Patricia smiled. If we started tomorrow and worked very quickly, probably about 30 days. Margaret spent the next 4 weeks working harder than she had in years. Every morning, she met Patricia and graduate students in her backyard, systematically cataloging every plant on the property. What they discovered amazed everyone, including Margaret. The apple tree Marcus had helped her plant was actually a rare heirloom variety, one of only a dozen known specimens still growing in the state. The roses Harold had given her were heritage bourbon roses, direct descendants of varieties grown in European monastery gardens during the Middle Ages. Most significantly, Margaret's approach to gardening had created what Dr. Williams called an accidental ecosystem. The diversity of plants had created a habitat that supported over 40 species of birds, countless beneficial insects, and soil microorganisms rapidly disappearing from the increasingly developed landscape. Margaret, this isn't just a garden. It's a living laboratory. It's a teaching tool. It's a piece of living history. Margaret looked around at her yard, seeing it through new eyes. I just planted what I liked. That's what makes it so remarkable. You followed your instincts, and your instincts were scientifically sound. Marcus called twice during those 4 weeks. The second time came on a Thursday evening. Nana, I need to talk to you. The development company called. They said there might be some kind of delay with the project. Something about a historical designation. That's correct. Nana, you can't do this. The sale is final. People are depending on this project. I've already made commitments based on my share of the proceeds. Margaret felt something cold settle in her stomach. Your share. I'm getting a finder's fee for facilitating the sale. $200,000. Margaret closed her eyes. You sold my home for money. It's not like that, Nana. Marcus, I want you to listen very carefully. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing an application to have this property designated as historically significant. If it's approved, the development will be delayed indefinitely. You can't do that. What about my finder's fee? Margaret looked out at her garden, where fireflies were beginning to dance among the roses. What about the boy who used to help me plant tomatoes? What about the child who called this place home? Marcus was quiet. That boy deserved better than to be sold for $200,000. And so did I. The public hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in the community center. Margaret arrived early, wearing her best dress and Harold's pearl necklace. She wasn't prepared for crowd. The room was packed with neighbors, friends from church, former students, and people from surrounding towns who had driven in to show support. Betty from next door had made a poster board of photographs showing Margaret's garden through the seasons. Ruth had organized a petition with over 300 signatures. Mr. Davidson sat in the front row with lawyers, looking considerably less confident than he had in his office. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. Dr. Williams presented their case first, with detailed photographs, botanical surveys, and ecological impact assessments. She spoke about the rarity of certain specimens, the educational value of the garden, and the environmental benefits of preserving established ecosystems. Davidson's lawyer argued that the property had no legitimate historical significance, that the garden was the work of an amateur hobbyist. Then Margaret was called to speak. She walked to the front slowly, feeling the weight of every eye upon her. She had prepared remarks, but looking out at the faces of people who had been part of her life for decades, she set her notes aside. My name is Margaret Coleman, and for 43 years, for 12, Elm Street has been my home. She talked about arriving as a young bride, about learning to garden for necessity, about the joy of watching things grow. She talked about Harold, about the roses he planted to make her smile every morning. She talked about Marcus, about the apple tree, about hope that had grown alongside the plants. But this isn't just about my garden. It's about what we choose to preserve and what we choose to destroy. It's about whether we value the things that take decades to grow as much as we value the things that can be built in months. She looked directly at Mr. Davidson. You can tear down my house and build your condominiums. You can pave over my garden and plant ornamental shrubs. But you can't recreate 43 years of growth. You can't replace the relationships that have developed between the plants and the birds and the insects and the soil. Margaret's voice grew stronger. I'm not asking you to preserve my garden because it's mine. I'm asking you to preserve it because it's ours. It belongs to the community that has watched it grow, to the children who have learned from it, to the future generations who deserve to see what's possible when we choose to nurture rather than destroy. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Betty started clapping, and soon the entire room was applauding. After a brief recess, the hearing officer's decision was swift. After reviewing the evidence, I find that the property at 412 Elm Street meets the criteria for historical designation. The application is approved, effective immediately. The room erupted in cheers. Davidson and his lawyers left quickly, their faces grim. Margaret had won. Her garden was safe. Her home was secure. Marcus came to see her 3 days after the hearing. Margaret was deadheading roses when she heard his car. Nana. Hello, Marcus. He stood several feet away, hands in his coat pockets. I heard about the hearing. Congratulations. Thank you. I lost a finder's fee. I'm in some financial trouble, Nana. I made bad investments, took on too much debt. I thought this would solve everything. And you thought I wouldn't mind being homeless as long as it solved your problems? I told myself you'd be happier somewhere with less responsibility, that you were getting too old to manage this place alone. Margaret finally turned to face him. Marcus, I'm 81 years old. I've been managing this place alone for 15 years. What made you think I suddenly couldn't handle it? You fell last winter. What if something serious had happened? Margaret studied his face, seeing genuine worry beneath the rationalization. Marcus, were you concerned about my safety, or were you concerned about your inheritance? He looked away. Both, I guess. Does that make me a terrible person? It makes you human, but it also makes you wrong. She walked to the apple tree they had planted together. Marcus followed. Do you remember this tree? Of course. Do you remember why we planted it? Marcus was quiet. You said I needed something that would grow with me. Something that would still be here when I was grown up to remind me that I belonged somewhere, and that even when things seem hopeless, there was always next season to look forward to. Margaret picked one of the remaining apples and handed it to him. This tree has been through droughts and floods, ice storms and heat waves. It's been pruned and fertilized and worried over. And every year it produces fruit. But if I had dug it up after the first bad season and sold it to someone who promised to plant something more profitable, where would we be now? Marcus turned the apple over in his hands. You're the tree, aren't you? And I tried to dig you up. You did more than try. I'm sorry, Nana. I'm so sorry. I don't know how I became the kind of person who would do this to you. Margaret saw both the man he had become and the boy he had been. The hurt was still fresh, but underneath was a memory of small hands helping her plant seeds. Marcus, do you know the difference between annual plants and perennials? Annuals die after one season. Perennials come back year after year. That's right. Annuals give you immediate gratification, fast growth, quick blooms, instant results. But they don't last. Perennials take longer to establish. Sometimes they don't flower the first year, but once they're rooted, they're with you for the long haul. She paused. Love is supposed to be a perennial, Marcus. It's supposed to survive the hard seasons and come back stronger. But somewhere along the way, you started treating our relationship like an annual, something that only mattered for immediate returns. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if you can, but I know you can't fix it with money or quick solutions or by trying to manage me like I'm a problem to be solved. Then how? Margaret looked around her garden at the evidence of decades of patient tending, the same way you grow anything worthwhile. Slowly, carefully, and with more attention over the following months, Marcus tried to rebuild what he had broken. He started small, calling regularly, actually listening when Margaret talked instead of waiting for his turn to speak. He helped her winterize the garden beds, wrapping delicate plants in burlap and spreading mulch around the roses. The trust between them grew slowly, like a perennial establishing its root system. There were setbacks and breakthroughs. The day Marcus brought his new girlfriend to meet her, not to show off, but because he genuinely wanted the two women in his life to know each other. The afternoon he called in tears about a promotion at work, wanting to share good news. I miss him, Margaret confided to Patricia. I miss the boy he used to be, and I'm trying to figure out if I can love the man he's becoming. Love isn't about the person someone used to be. It's about seeing who they're capable of becoming and choosing to invest in that potential. The real test came the following spring when Margaret suffered a mild heart attack while working in the garden. Marcus rushed to the hospital, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. He found her in the cardiac unit, looking small against the white sheets but very much alive and characteristically feisty. "Don't you dare use this as an excuse to put me in a nursing home," were her first words. "I wasn't going to," he said, and meant it. During her recovery, Margaret updated her will. She left the house and garden to the college, to be maintained as a teaching garden and research facility. But there were conditions. Marcus would serve on the advisory board. There would always be an apartment available to family members who needed it, and every spring, someone from their family would plant something new in a memorial section. "You're giving me a way to stay connected to this place even after you're gone. I'm giving you a way to be the kind of person who deserves to stay connected. The choice to be that person is still yours to make." Margaret lived for 7 more years, long enough to see the property transferred to college, long enough to watch Marcus truly become a man she'd always hoped he could be. She died peacefully in her sleep on an October morning, with the windows open and the scent of roses drifting through the house. Marcus found her when he came for their weekly garden planting session, and his first instinct was to sit beside her bed and thank her for every lesson about patience and forgiveness and the long, slow work of growing something beautiful. The funeral was held in the garden itself, under the apple tree they had planted together. Marcus spoke about perennials and patience, about the difference between success and its appearance, about how his grandmother had taught him that some mistakes could be forgiven and some damage healed, but only through consistent, daily acts of love and care. After the service, Marcus found himself alone in the garden. The late afternoon light was golden and warm, the way it had been on so many days when he'd worked beside her among the flowers. He walked to the memorial section, where a plaque would soon bear her name alongside Harold's. In his pocket was an apple seedling, grown from seeds of the tree they had planted when he was 8 years old. As he knelt to plant it, Marcus understood that this wasn't an ending. It was another beginning, another chance for something small and vulnerable to grow into something strong and lasting. The garden would continue. Students would learn here. Researchers would make discoveries. Families would find refuge. And every spring, something new would be planted in memory of love that endures beyond the people who plant it. "I'll take care of them, Nana," he whispered to the gathering dusk. "All of them. The plants and the people and the promises. I'll remember what you taught me about growing things at last." A gentle breeze moved through the garden, rustling the leaves and carrying the scent of roses and rich earth and the endless possibility of another season's growth. Some gardens never really end. They just keep growing, tended by new hands, but rooted in the same eternal truths about love and patience and the quiet faith that tomorrow's harvest is always worth today's labor. In the fading light of that autumn evening, surrounded by the living legacy of a woman who understood that the most important things couldn't be bought or sold, but only carefully cultivated over time, Marcus finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy. The garden she had planned would continue to flourish long after both of them were gone, a testament to the truth that love, like the very best perennials, only grows stronger with time.